My family wanted me to miss my college graduation so I could watch my nephew because they had a trip planned. When I refused, they called me selfish and stopped talking to me. But years later, when they need help taking care of the elderly, suddenly I'm still the selfish one. How convenient. My family wanted me to miss my college graduation so I could babysit my nephew while they went on vacation. And when I said no, my mother looked at me like I'd just betrayed them. The living room smelled like sunscreen and excitement. Suitcases stood open on the floor, bright and full of plans that didn't include me. My graduation gown hung on the back of a chair, black fabric catching the morning light like it mattered to no one but me. "You're being selfish," my sister said flatly, bouncing her son on her hip without even looking at me. Selfish, for wanting to walk across a stage I'd earned. My father didn't argue. He just picked up his car keys and walked past me, silence heavier than any insult. The front door closed behind them with a quiet final click. In that moment, I understood something they didn't. They thought my value was in what I gave them. They had no idea what they'd just lost. I was the youngest in my family, which meant I existed somewhere between invisible and convenient. My sister, Nadia, had always been the center of gravity. Her milestones were celebrated like national holidays. Her wedding, her pregnancy, her son's first steps. My milestones were acknowledged politely, like calendar reminders no one bothered to open. I learned early not to expect applause. When I stayed up until 3 a.m. studying, no one noticed the light under my door. When I worked weekends to pay my own tuition, no one asked why I was always tired. But when they needed someone to babysit, drive, fix, or sacrifice, they remembered my number instantly. "You're responsible," they'd say. It sounded like praise. It was actually permission to use me. I didn't complain. I told myself this was temporary, that once I graduated, once I built something of my own, they would see me differently, respect me differently. But deep down, I knew the truth they never said out loud. To them, I wasn't a person becoming something. I was a resource they assumed would always be there. After that morning, they didn't argue with me again. They simply adjusted the shape of their silence. Family dinners continued without invitation. I found out about them through photos posted. Hours later, my nephew smiling in someone's lap, my sister glowing, my parents leaning in close. There was always an empty space where I could have been. It never looked like anyone noticed. When I did see them, the conversations were careful and short. My mother would ask, "How's work?" without waiting for the answer. My father would nod once, eyes already drifting toward the television. Nadia spoke to me the way people speak to strangers in elevators. Polite, distant, finished before it began. But they never stopped asking for favors. "Can you transfer some money this week?" my father said once, his voice casual, like he was asking for the time. No apology, no acknowledgement of the months they'd erased me. Just expectation. When I hesitated, there was always that look. Not anger, worse. Disappointment, as if I had failed a role they'd assigned me without my consent. That was when I began to understand something quietly, clearly. They didn't miss me. They missed access to me. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was finishing a report that had taken me 6 months to build. My phone vibrated once. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "Careful. Your father's health isn't what it used to be," she said. "We need help. Nadia can't manage everything alone. Need help." Words they hadn't used when it came to me in years. I didn't respond immediately. I watched my reflection in the dark computer screen, older now, steadier, someone they didn't really know anymore. "I thought I was selfish," I said quietly. There was a pause on the other end. Not denial, not apology, just silence, searching for the right version of me. That was when I understood. They hadn't changed. Their circumstances had, and for the first time in my life, I realized something that felt both heavy and freeing at the same time. I was no longer waiting for their approval. I was deciding their access, not out of anger, out of clarity. I didn't refuse them. That would have been too simple, too emotional, too easy to dismiss as the same selfishness they'd always accused me of. Instead, I agreed. "I'll help," I told my mother. My voice was calm enough to reassure her, predictable enough to restore her confidence in the version of me she remembered. But I helped on my terms. Years earlier, after graduation, the ceremony they never attended, I had built a career in healthcare administration. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught me something valuable. Systems protect people better than emotions do. I understood paperwork, liability, authority, access, so I began slowly. I arranged my father's medical consultations. I spoke directly to doctors. I documented everything, every medication, every recommendation, every expense. I became the point of contact, not because they asked me to, but because they needed someone competent. They trusted me again without realizing what trust actually meant. Trust meant signatures. Trust meant decisions. Trust meant control shifting quietly into my hands, disguised as responsibility. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind them of the graduation they missed. I simply made myself essential in ways they could no longer ignore or undo. The first time Nadia asked me before making a decision, she didn't realize what she was doing. She stood in the hallway outside the clinic, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. "Should we schedule his therapy on Mondays or Thursdays?" she asked. "Should we, not you handle it, not you figure it out?" she was asking. I looked down at the folder in my hands, my name printed neatly beside the words authorized contact. Ink on paper, quiet proof of something that had shifted while they weren't paying attention. "Thursdays," I said. "It fits my schedule." She nodded immediately. My schedule. Not hers, not theirs. Mine. Over time, it happened more often. My mother waited for my calls before taking action. My father looked at me when doctors spoke, his eyes searching for my interpretation. Conversations paused until I answered. Decisions rested in my silence. No one called me selfish anymore. They called me reliable, responsible, necessary. The same qualities they had once used to control me were now the ones that placed them gently, permanently, in my hands. I never reminded them of the graduation they missed. I didn't need to. They were finally standing where I had once stood, waiting to be seen. Respect didn't arrive with apologies. It arrived in smaller, quieter ways. My mother began calling before making plans, her voice careful, as if she understood something fragile now existed between us. Nadia stopped assuming I would adjust my life around hers. She asked what worked for me. She waited for my answer. Even my father changed. He never said he was proud of me. That wasn't his language. But one afternoon, as I helped him into his chair, his hand rested on my arm a second longer than necessary. His grip was weaker now, but the gesture wasn't. He was depending on me, and he knew it. What mattered wasn't their need. It was my choice. For years, they had believed access to me was automatic, unquestioned, permanent. Now every call they made carried uncertainty. Every favor they requested carried awareness. They understood finally that I could say no. Not because I was selfish, because I had learned my worth didn't come from their approval. It came from my boundaries, and that realization changed everything. Not just for them, but for me. Because when people stop taking you for granted, they start seeing you clearly. And once they see you clearly, they never forget it. I still keep my graduation photo in a simple black frame on my desk. In it, I'm standing alone in my gown. The empty seats behind me blurred into soft shadows. At the time, the absence felt louder than any applause. I thought that moment defined what I meant to them. Now I see it differently. That was the first decision I ever made for myself without their permission. Everything that followed, my career, my independence, my boundaries, grew from that quiet refusal. I help them when I choose to. I answer when I want to. And sometimes, I let the phone ring, just to remind myself that I can. Not out of cruelty. Out of balance, they speak to me differently. Now. Carefully. Respectfully. Like someone whose presence isn't guaranteed. And I've learned something they never taught me growing up. Love without respect is obligation. Respect without control is peace. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need revenge the way they would understand it. I only needed to stop being available on demand. Because the moment I stopped asking to be valued was the moment they finally saw my worth.